and with me I've got two panelists. The wonderful creator of Orgo's Elixir, Tim. I can't pronounce your last name,
Sevenhusen.
Sevenhusen. I'll get that on eventually. Just like how I got Chase Foster's last name down. Who do you write for now? You change so often.
Imperial Esports. I'm the editor-in-chief there, and I run the Rough Drafts podcast.
There you go. Alright, we haven't been on for a while. It is the natural law of the world in the universe of Into the Rift that me or Emily are always going to be sick at one point. There's never a time where we are both healthy at the same time. If there is, please check for the impending apocalypse. Anyway, alright, by now, we're going to talk about a brief show on NA and EU LCS. We're going to quickly go over the games, not all of them, just some, like the important ones that we thought to talk about. And then we're going to do some fun knee-jerk reactions on Week 2 predictions. Alright, so first, let's talk about our wonderful European region. Let's talk about Suspense, and we're talking about Fnatic Origin. The big game that everyone expected coming out. Does anyone have some insight they want to share on Fnatic Origin?
Well, I mean, I guess the perfect way to start is this is what you have to hope for as a Fnatic fan on what Gamsu is capable of in the long run. They spent a lot of time with Spirit using his elastic slingshots to help get some ganks off, help get Olaf to a place where he was in a considerable lead, and Gamsu did something that we didn't necessarily see him do consistently last split, which was take that lead and use it to his advantage. It just came to this point where Soaz was constantly getting bullied in and out of lane, and there was nothing that Origin could really do as a response in order to, kind of turn that around. They just constantly put Origin on the back foot, and meanwhile, you look at Amazing, the guy who we would usually see helping Soaz out, helping on these three-man tower dives bot lane, and he just looked lost. I mean, I remember there was a literal 30-second period of time where he was wandering near the Dragon Pit trying to decide between mid lane and the bot lane as to where he should gank next. And it really just does feel like while Fnatic came in with a plan of let's get Gamsu going, let's get Spirit going, let's snowball this area and run from there, Origin just still hasn't figured out how to balance Power of Evil's need to have a little bit more jungle attention versus last year when they had Xpeke, who was so self-sufficient that they could focus exclusively on the top lane and bot lane with Amazing's pathing. And until they figure that out, it just really didn't feel like they were on the same page here.
Sure. I also felt like it may have had something to do with their unfortunate 1v2 top lane, where he missed the queue and went in anyway. He just kind of fell apart after that. I don't know. Tim, do you have any insights on that game?
Yeah, I thought there's it was really interesting in that game how Fnatic looked so good over the course of that game, and the further the game went, the better Fnatic looked. And I think we have to step back when we're interpreting that and look at the composition they're running and what the conditions were of winning that composition with that composition. They had Olaf, who is, I don't know if you have a more snowbally champion than Olaf, who when he's ahead, he cannot be stopped. When he's behind, he's kind of like, he runs into a fight, and if they have enough damage, he just kind of dies. The entire composition, not a lot of wave clear with, LeBlanc. They could use the Lucian ultimate to wave clear, but, it wasn't a good defensive comp, but it was a great comp for playing from ahead. So, when Fnatic came in, got this lead early, which I agree, Chase, fully. Amazing did not look good this game, but it's not that he didn't look good from the start. He got the first blood gank off. Fnatic got the play into bottom lane to counter it, get some kills back, and it was from there that Fnatic had the lead. And since they had this snowballing comp, they had Olaf who can take a lead and just push it so hard. LeBlanc kind of similar, and the entire composition was built around get a lead and pressure. And once they had that lead, I don't know if there's a lot that Origin could do, to stop it. Maybe if they had a bit of a different composition or a couple of plays had gone differently. But as a general theme, once Fnatic was ahead, it was just they had what they wanted, which makes it really interesting. If we think what happened in the next game, which we won't go there yet, but Fnatic had the exact same composition, and look what happened there. So, I just thought a lot of it was to do with Fnatic's composition and full credit to them for knowing what their composition needed to do to win and executing on that really well.
Oh, cool. Since we're kind of on the topic of Fnatic, let's actually move into the next Fnatic game, which was Fnatic vs. G2. I know Chase has a lot to say about G2.
So we're talking G2
G2
versus
G2 Rocket?
Yeah.
Oh, I wrote it down wrong. G2. Oh, I'm bad at this.
So you want
let's talk Vitality Fnatic. My bad.
Yeah, okay, because I do have a lot of thoughts about the Vitality Fnatic game. I thought that was one of the more interesting ones, just because I felt like Vitality did two things that I really loved. First, they took a lot of hard CC to really put a limitation on how much Spirit was going to be able to get away with. Because when you're looking at those Zac ganks, once he gets in, he can be pinned down before he gets some of those bigger damages off to you. And by doing so, by having the Morgana Black Shield to eliminate some of the burst there, by having all of that hard CC and roaming and putting a lot of emphasis on making sure that Gamsu didn't get ahead, you had the exact kind of problem that Tim just touched on, which is that when an Olaf is behind, there's not a lot that he's going to do. And so Gamsu is just nowhere near the same kind of threat that he was in Game 1. And on the other hand, the way that they were able to stop the Zac Slingshot as much as they were, other than just their composition, was this great sense of vision control. You saw that the two most likely places for Zac to kind of do his Elastic Slingshot coming in through the enemy jungle kind of unexpected were warded almost 100% of the time by Vitality. They put a lot of time and energy and resources into making sure those corners of the map were ready to go. And it showed because they saw most of these ganks coming and were able to react defensively before those kills came off. And it really showed just how scared Fnatic was of that vision control, that around the 20-minute mark, they had 3 upgraded sweepers and very few actual ways of placing wards. And they put so much time and energy towards trying to reclaim their own jungle once their inner towers came down, that they forgot the biggest problem of all, which was the Baron that was up. And once Vitality claimed that, it was just so much easier for them to break into the base accordingly.
Yeah, it was a completely different story from Fnatic's first game. And I think, a lot of things that Vitality did were based on seeing what Fnatic had done the previous day. Especially because they played the exact same 5 champions, which in some ways you can kind of criticize Fnatic for. I don't give them too much criticism for it because they probably don't have a lot of practice. It's a composition that worked, and to its credit, they're going up against a misfortune. When you've got Olaf and Zac, who can, there aren't many better champions for just getting in on a stationary target in the backline, because Olaf can't be CC'd, Zac has such a long-range dive. If they had an advantage in gold, they could have stomped certain team fights by getting onto Misfortune, and then they have to deal with Ryze after. But the idea was there. But because Vitality saw what had happened with Gamsu getting ahead and all these other things, their first gank went to Gamsu, whereas Amazing's first blood gank was onto the bottom lane, and Gamsu could teleport in and counter it. Well, the first gank went down to Gamsu. He's got no help coming. There's no teleport to come in from the other side of the map. So I think even from that point, and then with the vision control to shut down Zac, like Chase is talking about, and all these things, they were able to counter what Fnatic did. And then the moment that Fnatic was behind, they didn't really have many comeback options. I touched on the lack of wave clear in this composition before, lack of consistent wave clear. And so all they could really do is try to force a team fight before it got too far out of hand, because they're fighting against the scaling of a Fiora and a Ryze. And if they, even if they did have enough wave clear to stall, they were just digging their own grave by letting those champions scale. So, yeah, Fnatic got shut down because of a really smart counter plan by Vitality, which means going into week 2, Fnatic needs something different. They could go with the same kind of philosophy, but they're going to need some kind of different comeback mechanisms. They've got to get their one of their other carries, Reckless or Febiven, to win lane, not just go even, to give another option. They've got to do something a little different, because if their next opponent is as smart as Vitality, which may not happen, but give them the credit, maybe they're able to come in and shut Fnatic down the same way.
Do you think Fnatic has too little threats on their team right now compared to before?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think Reckless and Febiven are still who they were, I think Spirit, we've only seen him on the one champion in Europe so far, but I think on a range of champions, he can definitely carry. And Gamsu, if he's set up for it, I think can carry as well, but I think he's someone who needs his teammates to set him up for it. I think they definitely have a wide range of threats on their team.
Okay.
I think those threats are going to come online in the long run. The one thing I do want to point out is that we had a Reckless game against Vitality where he had 0 kills or assists. That's not what's going to help Fnatic win games. And some of that's still building up that kind of synergy with Noxiac, who I think played fine this week. I've never been a huge Noxiac guy, but I think he's certainly coming into his own. But you can tell that the comfort that Reckless had when he was playing with Yellowstar just isn't there yet. He's not feeling as comfortable pulling the trigger on plays and trying to make those kind of moments for himself. And for a guy who had so many kills and led the league in KDA across 80 carries by such a large margin last split, I really want him to get to 100%. So I don't have to worry about, is Gamsu going to be able to consistently be the guy that we saw in Game 1? Because I think that's a very hard ask at this point.
And I think a big question for me is not who's going to carry, but who's going to make the plays. Depending on how you define carry, I'm using it in the sense of who's going to do the damage. But I think in the 2015 Fnatic, both Huni and Reignover were the kind of player who's going to suddenly throw themselves in and make something happen. I don't think Gamsu is that kind of player. Most of his plays tend to be reacting to something else happening, joining in on something else happening. So he needs somebody to call for his teleport. They make the play, and he kind of joins in on it most of the time. Spirit can be a playmaker, absolutely. But beyond Spirit, who's going to do it? Noxiac is going to have to be that guy, I think, because 2015 Yellowstar was also definitely a playmaker. So Spirit, we got to see it from Noxiac. And then you got to have more options than that, I think. So that's my big question: is who's going to make the plays, who's going to make the initiations.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll kind of wrap up that one. I know with these games a little not chronological order. We're going to link them team by team because they actually work together really well. So for Fnatic, we're going to go into Vitality Rocket. So while we're still on the topic of Vitality, do we see a lot of potential in Vitality over the win of Fnatic, or do you think they're inconsistent because their game against Rocket wasn't really as impressive?
Well, I really do feel like a lot of what happened against Rocket was them not playing to their strengths. Cabochard, putting him on Kennen, I thought was a weird decision. Cabochard right now is so good at hard carrying, split pushing top laners. He just does so well in lane, getting those CS advantages and kind of bullying his way in there. I felt like he could have done that against Freddy. I don't feel like Kennen was the best tool for him in that regard. The other thing that I thought Rocket did that was really good was they really went hard on the counter-jungling plan with Airwalks. They tried to throw Shook off his game early and often. And if ever you were going to point to a weakness for Vitality, I think it is Shook. He's a guy that when things go well, Shook looks great, but when he has a bad game, he fell so far behind Airwalks, which is not a sentence I thought I was going to be saying about most junglers compared to Airwalks, but it really was just this idea of we're going to come at you and put you specifically on the defensive, and let's see you come back from a deficit, and Shook is just not that guy, and this is the problem you run into when you have a team with Lulu and Kennen that doesn't, a lot of that damage was going to have to come from Tristana. If that's going to happen, you better scale into the late game. And that wasn't going to happen, and even if they did, Ryze was going to be there scaling just as hard and being just as incredible of a threat. So to me, it was a lot of weird decisions about how they picked their team and how they planned around Rocket, whereas Rocket really felt like they went into this knowing this is how we want to attack them. We want to throw Shook off their game. Let's see if we can pull it off, and they managed to do that. Yeah,
and I think you got to give credit to Shook for his very early game pathing in both games they played. Really, against Fnatic, he had the very early first blood kill where he had kind of bumped into Spirit in the jungle. They kind of sparred a little bit. They backed off. Spirit thought, I'm going to curl around and get some deep vision to track where Shook goes next. Shook's like, I'm just going to stay here and go do a tower dive and get first blood. So, and then again, in the earlier game against Roccat Shook also had a pretty creative path to go in and tower dive Freddy, and I think that was fairly early on, and I give him credit for that. But just because you can get the first couple of plays, the first 5 to 8 minutes looking good, well, if your play really hinges on whether that works or not, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you're in big trouble. That's a bit of an issue. The main thing that stood out to me from Vitality versus Roccat, though, was Saphir, formerly known as Jeebus, I guess, and his play that game. The way he used the package with Corki multiple times, he made really big plays with it, including some of the counter jungling on Shook, going in there with Airwalks and getting the kill on him, and just starting off team fights, and he just carried that game so hard. I was really impressed with how he played.
All right. Let's see. Let's tie that into the other Roccat game, which is accurately G2 Rocket. My bad from earlier. I'll stick with Rocket a little bit longer. Going off this game as well, a lot of people were not expecting much out of Rocket this season, from what I've heard from the general Twitterverse or whatever you want to call it. But
yes,
pleasantly surprised how Rocket performed overall.
Yeah, as a Roccat fan, I was pretty pleased with how that went. I didn't think we were going to be Vitality, so I was pretty happy with how that had gone. I thought that the beginning of this game against G2 went very well. Up until about the 17th minute, they were ahead consistently by a good 1.5 to 2,000 gold. They just did a very good job again, getting some counter jungling pressure with Airwalks, getting some really nice plays with Betsy, taking the Rise into the Lulu for the second time that Roccat had done that, and that lane matchup went very well early. Unfortunately, we saw the problem with this Roccat team, at least at this point, which is that there are some young guys that are just not making the kind of calls that you need and having everyone on the same page. And you look at that fight in the 17th minute, and you see they're pushing in, trying to get pressure on that inner mid tower. They see G2 moving up the lane. Freddy 122's coming in for the teleport. It's like, okay, they're choosing to fight this. Probably don't need to. Not a lot you're going to gain, and a bad fight here would be awkward. And it seems like Freddy 122 realizes it, because he cancels the teleport. Edward starts moving towards the red side jungle. They're in full escape mode. And then Airwalks tries to peel off and attack Kikis on the side. And suddenly they've decided to make it a team fight after all, and they have no front line. And everything falls to bits, and they lose 4 guys and 2 towers, and suddenly they're down 2,000 gold. And that just comes from a lack of understanding of what it is your teammates are trying to do, and what your loss condition is to a certain extent. Because, there's a chance that fight goes well if everything goes according to plan. Granted, I don't personally like Kindred trying to chunk down a Tahm Kench. That's not the way I would go. But I could at least see a theoretical universe in which, the teleport goes through, Edward does some good zoning, and they could win that fight. But the chances of a gain were so low. Their best case scenario was, winning that fight and putting pressure on a tower they'd already put a significant amount of pressure on, and they were already in the lead. But by being on these separate wavelengths, they just destroyed themselves. And credit to G2. G2 never looked back. Once you gave Emperor any amount of breathing room and started getting him some resources, that Kalista started going insane on damage. And Kikis has showed us nothing else this week that he understands how to play Tahm Kench as a top laner. He using the ultimate to be there for team fights and really being that front line that they need him to be. So, you got to give G2 the credit for closing out as efficiently as they did, but man, oh man, Roccat really has some issues with their communication if they're going to be anything more than the team we thought they were at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and I don't have too many points to add to that. I thought my notes on this game were not super detailed. I had 4 points. I said Kindred is OP, which I think is true. I think and Trick played Graves in the other game, and I think Graves is even more OP. So good for Trick, but he was kind of playing OP champions, which good for him. Which is also good for him. My other notes were Emperor played super well. I agreed on that. Roccat had bad team fight target selection, just like you touched on. And my other note was that there were throws, and there were throwbacks, and there were re-throwbacks, is the wording I chose to use. I don't know, I wasn't super impressed with the strategic movements of either team. I thought G2 played a better skill game in the end. I think, especially with Trick and Emperor, they did really well individually, and G2 overall was the better team. But it was such a throwy game back and forth from what I remember. So, yeah, I don't know. Both of those teams I need to see a lot more from.
Okay.
Before I'm willing to jump on a G2 bandwagon.
Sure. I'll throw actually one extra question in there, just because I am curious about this. So Emperor looked amazing in his 2 games. So some history. He was on CJ Blaze, and then he spent some time in Brazil. Got 2nd place, if I recall correctly. I'll have to double check with Emily, who might yell at me for not remembering. And then got stuck in Visa Limbo for TDK. Finally got to play in TDK after, week 6, I think? Or was like halfway. And then now he's finally shining in Europe. Is Emperor the real deal, or did he just look really good in these games? I know it might be too early to tell, because there's a lot to consider in terms of synergy with the support, synergy with his team, how much his team's actually giving him compared to other teams, but how do you feel about Emperor?
I think Emperor is a good embodiment of the idea in League of Legends that the team is so much more important than the player. I think it's more fun and more interesting a lot of the time to talk about this player is really good, that player is a superstar, but I don't care how good your superstars are. If you've got 5 superstars up against 5 good players, and the good players know how to work together, they're going to be better. Assuming the superstars don't know how to work together really well. I think Emperor clearly has talent. I think his struggles in the past in some of these other teams have been from not playing in a really good, strong synergy environment, not getting the teamwork down, and that hasn't been entirely within his control. He's gone to regions where there have been, the classic language issues. In TDK, there were the visa issues, so he. Apparently he had been practicing with the team in the meantime, but that's not the same as being on stage and working together on a stage environment. But I think that's usually been the thing holding him back, is just not being able to get into a really strong team concept in the time I've seen him. I'm not sure about when he was playing in Korea, but I think he's definitely a talented player.
Yeah, he's got the ability to make some cool engages. The key for him is going to be knowing when to back off. And I will say in the Elements game, you saw a couple times where he was almost daring Spraddle and Mr. Ralles to come out and fight him. Like, you would see there's one minion underneath the tower, and he's underneath the Elements tower, and he's still kind of posturing like, I dare you to engage on me right now. And that comes from a confidence that he obviously deserved by the end of that game. But it's also something that I think really talented, patient kind of AD carries in Europe might be able to take advantage of with him. He does have this desire to make a play at all times, and the confidence within himself that he can pull it off. And sometimes he can, and he did a very good job of that this week, especially in Game 2 versus Roccat. I want to see what happens when he goes up against a laner of equal or greater skill, if he's able to hold that kind of aggression, playmaking style in check and kind of shift his play style to meet what his team needs, or if he's going to hope that the team can keep him alive, because I'm not sure if Hybrid is the guy that's going to make that work 100% of the time. But we'll see.
Alright, I think that's pretty fair. We'll have to keep an eye on him, as we will on all of these teams, since unfortunately 1 week is not a big enough sample size. But we're doing our best. Alright, let's move on to NA for now. First game we're going to talk about is Immortals vs C9. We're going to go right out the bracket, right out the gates with the big name on the block, Immortals.
Yeah, Immortals was, I think, they easily looked like the cleanest team, the best executing team in North America in the first week. They were honestly the only team I watched in any of those 10 games that I couldn't easily identify. Hey, they're doing this not well. There's this element of the game that they really need to tighten up. I just thought Immortals played really clean. They worked together really well. They executed. They had a good plan. They beat a team in 18 minutes. Not in this game, but that we're talking about. But I mean, what more can you say about that? What really stood out to me with Immortals and all the attention, naturally, people want to draw their attention onto the Korean duo. Huni and Reignover coming from Fnatic, and wow, look at they went so far at Worlds, and they're going to do the same thing here in NA. Now they're North American players, not European players. By the way, they're Korean, but but what really drew my attention with Immortals, especially in the game against Cloud9, was Adrian and Wild Turtle. They were the ones who I thought really made a lot of things happen. So Adrian, he wasn't doing anything flashy. He wasn't making eye-catching plays most of the time. There was one game, I think it was this game, kind of near the end, when they were sieging the bottom inhibitor turret, and suddenly Sneaky starts to channel his MF ult, and Adrian just instant interrupt. It was like, oh, beautiful.
Adrian was my hero for that.
Yeah, it was great, but I mean, kind of in a more soft sense, he was in on just about every single play that happened around the map, and not on a roaming champion either. Like he was playing Jano, isn't he? Like
Yeah, he was playing Jano.
I mean, yeah, you're there to support other people. Like it's a very group support kind of a champion, but being there everywhere on the map, and that's exactly what he did on Impulse as well. Like he had like over 80% kill participation in the summer regular season. Like he's just always there where everything is happening. And then for Wild Turtle, he got to do something that often wasn't the case last year, the second half of the year anyways, which is just let the other people make the plays, and he goes in and does his damage, he does his job, and suddenly he's getting kills and getting fed and snowballing. And because he had, like I mentioned when we were talking about Europe, Huni and Reignover, who can both make plays so well, Adrian's there, babysitting everybody, making sure everybody's doing things well. All of the team is setting Wild Turtle up, and he took that ball and he ran with it, and I was really impressed.
Actually, speaking of Wild Turtle, real quick, let me interrupt. Like when you look at Wild Turtle's like career in the LCS only, I'm not going to bring up the games when he was on Orbit before. That's all I'd like to one day. Small fact: Orbit was one of my favorite teams way back then. Anyway, so when he joined TSM, he was like the big. Really, really big players. Like Reggie was like around one of the strongest mids at the time, but like he was starting to fall off around then. And Reggie was the shot caller. He would call the shots, like go in now, like, and he would make the play, like flash TF, attempt a stun card, but actually red card or blue card, but whatever, he'd engage, right? And then Wild Turtle would just go like insane. Like Dyrus would play like a supportive, like flexible top lane. Xpecial would engage as well, whatever. Odd One would also engage like a Maokai or something like that, or Nocturne or Cho'Gath or whatever he was doing. Yeah. And then Wild Turtle, that's why he was so popular. That's how he was so like, Wild Turtle's a great AD carry. He was like going in crazy. And then when TSM started slumping, he would always be like, Wild Turtle was the first person to criticize. He's splashing in on Ezreal and getting like 2-shot by CLG or something like that. And then after that, Wild Turtle played more reserve, like because they got Bjergsen, right? Bjergsen was going to do all the really hard carrying, and then Wild Turtle would still get a lot of gold. It is a complete myth that Bjergsen got all the gold, by the way. He did get. I'm not saying he didn't get the most gold, but like Wild Turtle still got a lot of gold from Dyrus' lane, and he did a lot of damage. But when he's on the Immortals, I feel like he's going back to like a season 3 playstyle. He's like going in more. He's a little more unleashed.
He's able to be like the third or fourth person into a fight. Like he's going in, but he's got a body of people going in front of him. I think it's very similar to what we saw from Altec last split, where Altec had a group of teammates who would all charge into a fight, and Altec has like, hey, there are 4 big people in front of me making havoc. All I have to do is stand here and shoot people. Like, and whether he wants to move forward or not, I think Wild Turtle is more likely to take that wall of meat running in front of him and kind of charge in behind, where Altec was a little more like hang back and do his damage from a little more safe distance, be a little more judicious in his timing. But even so, it's having that style of going in as everybody goes in, the carries kind of follow up, but as a group, everybody's making something happen as a whole. And I think that's going to be really good for him. Definitely, I agree.
This is the perfect kind of team for Wild Turtle, honestly. And it's the first thing I said when I saw that Adrian was the guy he was going to be paired with, because Adrian was, in my opinion, the best disengaged support we saw in North America last split. I mean, anyone who manages to keep Rush alive as often as he did on Impulse is clearly doing something right as far as understanding how to make up for some potential, oversteps, positioning errors, whatever else. And it frees Wild Turtle to be the guy that he wants to be, because he knows that he has a support that's going to have his back, where people didn't really like to talk about it on TSM last split, but Lustboy made a significant step back, I think, by the end of his time there. And when Wild Turtle can't rely on plays being set up for him and he feels the need to make those plays himself, that's when we see silly flashes, and that's when we see those kind of moments that are so easy to pick apart and criticize. But now that he has this support that does do all these roams, that can make sure that it's always, setting up team fights when they want them, and adding in, a Huni who can do such a great job at the front line, and, Rainover and Pobelter, both of whom are very happy to help set up their teammates for plays. This is the team where if you were going to draw up where to put Wild Turtle, this is that team. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think we saw that here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that grows from this point, because I think that this is a synergy that is only going to continue to develop as the season goes on, and as Adrian and Wild Turtle get an even better sense of how to bounce off each other and bounce off the rest of this team with some of their roams to really do some crazy damage.
Yeah, exactly. Alright, so off the Wild Turtle tangent, my apologies. Back to the rest of Immortals. Well, actually, just about this game. How do we feel about Immortals versus C9 specifically?
Cloud9 really needs high? Is that fair to say?
Oh, right, yeah, Bunny was in this game. I guess we can talk about that too.
Yeah, I don't think Cloud9 looked too bad. I mean, I think Jensen, he was trying so hard to make that game work. I thought he was really aggressive, but the team had kind of fallen behind, and the further behind you are, the less likely your aggressive play is going to work. It's just, but that's why you have to try it, because your chances keep getting smaller and smaller. So, I thought Jensen played well. I didn't think that Cloud9 looked that bad, but they didn't look like a team led by High that knows exactly what it's trying to do and kind of makes it happen. So, I definitely agree. I think they're better with High. I expected them to run with High, and we'll see what they do in week 2. But it's really interesting to kind of see that at least. I think it's a good time to try out Bunny and see how it looks, because at some point they're probably going to need to use Bunny, even just to give High a break. They're probably thinking of setting up for Summer Split when they're going to have so many, maybe 2.5 times as many games to play, and they might need more breaks for High in that if he's still having some injury issues or whatever else, or trying to rest his wrists, things like that. So, I don't really fault them for using Bunny, but I do think High definitely gives them a better chance to win right now.
Yeah, well, the one thing they're really going to have to teach Bunny is how to take on the kind of shot-calling responsibilities that High has for this team. I mean, we've noticed that going back to summer. When High's not there, this team struggles to work on the same page and make sure that, Jensen and Balls and Sneaky are all aiming towards the same goal, and I think we saw a little bit of that here. More specifically, and this is the thing that worried me a bit, is I think a lot of people were wondering before the season how Rush was going to play on this team. Cloud9, obviously a very objective-focused team, usually likes to kind of take those mid to late game, towers, and you'd play that game of you take 1 tower here, we're taking 2 on the other side of the map. Whereas Rush is always going for that kind of flashy, highlight-style play. And it's one of the reasons he had such a huge kill count amongst junglers last split. And in this game, we just saw Rainover bully him. I mean, from start to finish, Rainover had a significant lead, and Rush just couldn't seem to get anything going. And given how much better Cloud9 looked in their second game, and of course some of that is they were playing Echo Fox, so it's kind of hard to compare, but, it did feel like Rush was kind of losing a lot of time and efficiency that he didn't lose on day 2 when he had a more secure shot caller, and it felt like they had a better sense of what to do in the early game. And it's very hard when you have something like a mid lane Echo and, your Rise is falling apart early because the top lane is getting, ganked as often as it is by Rainover. That's going to be very hard to come back from. And as well as Jensen played, I think that bigger understanding of how to best use Rush for this particular roster and how to keep the shot calling on point, which is what High's been so good at, is going to be the deciding factor in just where Cloud9's ceiling is this split.
And I think something worth pointing out between the 2 different Cloud9 games is that in the game against Immortals, Cloud9 lane swapped. They ended up in the kind of classic tower trade, and then everybody switches around and trade the other side towers. I think that doesn't allow Rush to do what he wants to do. He much prefers, his style is much better to play in standard lanes where he can find a creative path, force a gank, when he's playing Lee Sin, there are different gank paths and so on that you can do with that. But with the lane swapping, and I think probably without Hai being there, their execution on Cloud9's execution on the lane swap might not have been quite as good as it could have been. But I have a note in here that by about the 7-minute mark, Reignover had double Rush's farm, because from what I remember of this game, and I hope I'm not remembering it wrong, but Reignover knew we've got this set up with the lane swaps. I'm just going to farm. The playmaking opportunity is going to be there. I'm just going to power farm. Go in on Rek'Sai, great jungle clear, and Rush I think didn't quite grasp that the same way he's playing Lee Sin. He was more of a playmaker in the early game, not hard farming quite in the same way. And so they just had a different idea of how the early game needed to play out for them individually. You go into the game against Echo Fox, they had standard lanes. Rush had much more of the freedom that he wanted to go out and be a playmaking early game, as opposed to the farm and macro and map movement early game that Immortals that they played against Immortals. So.
Also, just kind of talking about Hai himself, I know that just like how mechanics has become an incredibly loose term, so is shot calling. So just kind of touching on the difference between the C9s. I was talking with this about Hai on the analyst desk with some other people, and it seems like Hai is the kind of shot caller who knows how to make other people look better. Okay, I know it's become a meme at this point, but I'm not trying to meme. Balls is not a very successful top laner individually, right? But Hai seems to know how to use balls in the proper way. He's like a surgeon in that sense. He's using the right tools at the right time, whatever. He's pointing people in the right directions, maybe using the right strategies, understanding the strengths of Jensen, which is why he was always ganking mid before when he was a jungler, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then with Bunny, it's he's the intern. He's they're trying to make a second Hai for so Hai can finally retire, because I think he wants to. I think he said he wants to retire, but they're no, we're gonna have you train this intern before the medical board's gonna let you go. No, I don't know. Maybe I'm speculating too much, but that's how I feel when I watch the differences between Cloud9 and those two games, because it's very different. It's night and day looking at those two games. Whether
Absolutely.
or not you want to point out the fact that it's a weaker team or not, but how they played was different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alright, let's see. Oh, we spent a lot of time on one game. Well, we technically talked about two games, but
Yeah.
let's move on to Energy versus Renegades. He's got some excellent thoughts about this game.
It was really nice to see Energy at full strength. Obviously, they had to have Chris and Shrimp come in on game one to meet the 3/5 rule, because
I think it's a really silly rule if you only use them for one game. But
They had to be consistent, though.
yeah.
it was an interesting kind of thing. But at the same time, I think we learned a lot more about Renegades necessarily than we did about NRG. I mean, Impact looked incredible. Impact looked as good as we saw him at any point in last split. His Fiora was just dominant. Moon's Elise was doing very well on ganks. Altec really scaled up well with the Callista, and I felt like Conquan's pillars were all on point on the Trundle. I mean, this is everything you could ask for NRG to do. He did, and oh, by the way, you also had GBM, who would be the MVP of the week, doing crazy Ahri things, because of course he can. On the other hand, I think we learned a lot more about Renegades and just where their limitations really lie, because you have this first pick Dr. Mundo that Legendary picks in, and it's, you know, it makes you wonder, like, is Mundo really the most powerful thing you can grab right now? You know, of all the different top laners that are available at this point, are you sure that that's the way you want to go? And that's especially true when you look at how easily it got bullied out of lane by Impact. You know, being a couple levels down within the first 5 minutes of the game, never really recovering, and in fact getting so bad that the Mundo literally couldn't deal with it. They started sending Alex Itch's Rise to deal with the Fiora split push, and that's not the matchup that you want, because the Grand Challenge just destroys so much of Rise's burst potential. And honestly, if Legendary is going to play like that every week, it's going to be very hard for this team to salvage it, because it is just so easy to bully him and force them to make suboptimal plays to cover for that. But, Remy played well. I thought that, that bot lane at least did their thing this week, and when they're able to keep Legendary at a point where he's at least even or not too far behind, they do fine. That's how they were able to, that Liquid game, it took forever, but they did eventually pull it out. When you see the way Impact just dominated that game start to finish, it leaves me with a lot of reasons to be excited about NRG and a lot of reasons to be afraid about Renegades on a week-to-week basis right now.
Yeah, I think for Renegades what we saw is... I think for both of these teams, really, what we saw in that week were things that we expected to see, or at least that I expected to see in kind of scouting them. Renegades, I felt, I wrote a scouting report article on them a couple of weeks ago. You can find that at Unicorn or through oracleselixir.com if you're curious how I predicted it. And it wasn't perfect, but I think the themes that came through were that they've got good coordination, they've got a good team identity, they've been playing together well, but their individual skill levels are not super high compared to you see what Impact can do against RF Legendary, just because of to be fair, on Fiora you get a lead. Now you're a Fiora with a lead. Yeah. Have fun. Against a tank, no less, but Impact is really good and had an individual skill level higher, and I think that's something that Renegades aren't, other than Freeze, who's very good, but the team around him aren't necessarily super big individual talents. Their coordination, I thought, was decent. Some of their playmaking in both games, in this against NRG included, they were pretty good at grouping up to try a play and making something. Pushing forward on something, initiating something, sieging something, and often it worked, sometimes it didn't, and I think they need to tighten that up a little bit. I'm sure there were some kind of stage jitters involved in that, some people playing on the stage for the first time, so I'm sure that they're going to tighten that up moving forward. But and then on NRG's side, I think what was really the theme coming in is that they've got these super high-powered carries, Impact, GBM, and Altec, who are all just excellent team fighters. But GBM and Altec are not the strongest laners. That's not to say they're bad laners, but they're not known for going in 1v1 or 2v2 in their lane, getting a 20 CS lead, and snowballing from the lane. They they usually kind of go even in lane. They have some negative CSD at 10 numbers, both of them, and. They kind of, we saw that in both games, they didn't really win it through the laning phase, but as the laning phase came to an end, they just started to blow things up in the team fights. They started to make plays once they left the lane, and that's, and Impact, especially, I thought in this game, was the one who was really all over the map, making everything happen, and GBM was the one who got the Star of the Week honors. Impact stood out more to me, maybe as I was just looking for different things, But yeah, I think if people are going to beat NRG, it's probably going to be by exploiting their laning phase with some kind of an early game strategy, rolling into a mid game that they just can't come back against because the lead is too big, something like that. But time will tell, and I'm sure they're aware of their own weaknesses as well, and we'll be working to try to protect against them.
All right, let's move on to the two CLG games. Actually, let's start with TSM CLG. Everyone is excited for this, and I think a lot of people actually did expect, they wanted TSM to win, but I expected TSM to lose.
Yeah, I mean, I had TSM number 1 for North America on my own personal power rankings, but not for day 1, week 1.
Yeah, because they're too much of a new team compared to CLG.
Yeah, I think end of the split, it'll still be hard to call it between TSM and Immortals, but I think end of the split, TSM would be much better than they were in this past week. And much better than they probably still will be in week 2. But yeah, I think CLG was a favorite to me to win this game, and it turned out they did. They didn't do it super cleanly, in my mind. A big problem to me, the thing that really stood out to me tactically, is that CLG they were too early in shifting into a 3-lane pressure. Not exactly 1-3-1. It was more fluid than that, but very early in the game, I can't remember when it was, maybe like 10, 12 minutes even. they started to have all three lanes pushing and trying to, be getting pressure on the towers and forcing TSM into bad decisions. But it was just too early in the game for that. They didn't have enough control. They didn't have enough of a lead. And that allowed TSM to make some plays back, keep things close, and suddenly the snowball wasn't rolling. Because when you're trying to pressure all three lanes like that, it's because you're trying to take a small lead, turn it into a medium lead, turn it into a big lead, and every time the opponent who's on the back foot tries to push out and make something happen, well, you take something somewhere else, and now you've won the trade. It's what we saw Fnatic do so well in their first game. It's what we've seen some other teams do really well, and CLG was trying to do that. I just thought they tried it too soon.
Yes.
Yeah. No, there's definitely some kinks for CLG to work out. But they did make a lot of, overall team decisions I really liked. I thought they handled the early game lane swap very well, and they ended up getting Darshan, the little bit of a lead he needed to keep Hauntzer on the back foot. And it never, it always felt like that split push threat, even if they started it too early and made it a lot closer than it needed to be, it always felt like that was going to win out at the end of the day, just from the way that CLG had built that team and played around it, and it I don't know, at least in my opinion, it always felt like Darshan was the best player on the Rift when he was doing those kinds of pushes. For me, so much of CLG was whether or not Stixxay and Aphromoo got going in a particular game. This was a game where Aphromu's Bard was on point. They were able to take advantage of some of the team fights that TSM would throw their way that were just a little disjointed. I think disjointed is a great way to summarize TSM as a whole. They gave up 5 dragons and 2 barons in this game. It's not really what you want to see as far as...
isn't uncommon for old TSM.
Yeah, but 5 of them is usually, especially in this meta, 5 is not great. And when you're not claiming any of your own, that's not ideal.
4 different players still losing 5 dragons, that's pretty unfortunate.
It's an issue, and that's something that they can fix. But CLG, at the very least, it looks like they're making those calls, and they have a good understanding of that side of things. The downside is what happens when Darshan isn't in a position to carry, and I think segueing a little bit, we saw that against Dignitas, where Kirei did a really good job of getting some ganks early, getting Smitty J in the lead over Darshan, and they just never really recovered. It put a lot of pressure on Huhi, which, he didn't look great. Aphromoo suddenly felt so much more pressure to get some deep wards down, and instead of, being a little bit safer, making sure he was moving up with Stixxay and making sure that was secure and maybe could even turn into some kill opportunities, he was going in on his own, getting caught out and giving up deaths he really didn't need to. And when you put so much of the pressure on some of these younger guys in Stixxay and Huhi that are still kind of figuring out how to channel the game sense side of things versus just the sheer play-making ability that at least Stixxay, I think, has. Huhi, I'm still kind of up in the air on. That's when CLG has problems. And against a team that was as disjointed against TSM, they were fine. But Dignitas really came in and seemed to know what they were doing. And I think that's why we saw 2 very different CLGs.
And I think to your point about kind of the playmaking on the carries, I think Huhi can and probably will end up being a playmaker, but right now he's just trying too hard. We saw that really a lot at IEM, for example. Like, he's on Rise and he's trying to flash in to make a play. When it's one-on-one and you're on a chase, sure, flash and Rune Prison, maybe you can do that, but flashing over a wall to make a play as Rise that's trying way too hard most of the time. And Stixxay, I think he also, like, both of those players need a lot of polish and a lot of experience before they become the players that I think they eventually will be. I think we might see it by the end of this split. I think Stixxay has shown a lot of strong things, but man, he got caught out in lane just so many times. And part of the reason is that I think Stixxay got caught out so much, and that some of these other issues, other people getting caught out, is just... I don't know if I've brought this up many times, but I feel like internally I harp on it all the time. Aphromoo and his warding volumes just... I don't know. He was, I'm pretty sure, the lowest ward output support last year in North America. After week 1, lowest ward output support in North America. He just... he placed less than 0.9 wards per minute, which is just horrible. And when you don't have ward coverage in a meta where ward coverage is so much lower than it has been in the past, just to start with, that's setting you up to not be able to push your lanes past the river or even up to the river, because you never know who's lurking there and is going to pick you off. So, Stixxay did get caught out. I don't think it's entirely his fault that he got caught out so much. I think he needed to have better communication of where the enemies were, and to be able to know where they are, you need to be able to have seen them in the first place. And
Right.
Aphromoo has needed to step up his warding game for so long.
Yeah, I think that's the concern there, is that if he isn't able to give the rest of these guys the ability to make smart plays and to kind of make educated decisions on when to go in, when to kind of force these fights, and how to make the roams and everything they need to get the power and the experience in the right place, they're going to make life a lot harder for themselves. And I think Huhi will figure it out. I think Stixxay will figure it out. Aphromoo at this point, though, if he hasn't figured out the vision side of things yet, I'm concerned about that. And I think the point you bring up there is a very valid one. It'll be interesting to see as he realizes that Stixxay just needs a different set of skills than maybe Doublelift did back in the day, who could have gotten away with some of that lack of vision. It'll be interesting to see if Aphromoo can adjust accordingly.
Right. So, kind of talking on that note, and more about TSM itself, I think COG has a closer. They're going to have to figure out what their team identity is going to be from now on, because they used to funnel things into Doublelift and Pole Vaulter. But if Huhi and Stixxay are this, I know they put gold into Darshan as well, but if Huhi and Stixxay are not as reliable yet, they're either going to have to polish them up like Tim said, or figure something else out, like you said. And kind of moving on to TSM. TSM has shown in 2 games that I think they have no idea what their team identity is, because you have too many stars on your team. Like, there was like this time where Yellowstar engaged on Elster, and then like half of TSM was walking away. Maybe he's used to the full obedience of Fnatic going in when he goes in.
Just the mentality of hooting your rain over, a play's going to happen? Yep.
Go in.
We're in.
Exactly.
Whereas I think Bjergsen last year was used to, what do you mean somebody else is going to make something happen on this team? It's me or no one. So it's understandable.
And it's one of those things where I don't think it's just Bjergsen either. Doublelift played how many years of his career saying to himself, either I carry or we lose? How many times did we see SK Gaming with Sven Skaren? You need to put the carry backpack on right now, or else we're not going to be able to do anything. Welcome to the entire summer split of Season 5. And that's a kind of an interesting balance of personalities and instincts to kind of sort together. And I think TSM will in the long run. We've seen their infrastructure prove that they can sort these things out. But it does take time. And I think people who expected TSM to be really powerful out of the gates forgets just how important having a system and being able to, feel confident in what everyone else is bringing to the table so that you can just play your own game really does matter. Once Bjergsen and Doublelift and Sven Skaren can all say to themselves, okay, this is my role, this is what I can trust my teammates to take care of for once, and now we can move forward as a unit, I think they're going to be great. Right now, it just does not feel like they have that sense yet, and we'll have to see how many weeks it takes to come in. It's kind of hard to put a timetable on that.
Also, just kind of more touching a little bit more on TSM's team identity. TSM, the last year, has more or less been give Bjergsen most of the gold, give most of Darius' gold to Wild Turtle, and then Bjergsen engage and carry. And this time you have Sven Skaren, who's supposed to carry. You have Hanser, who is he going to get screwed over gold-wise? Probably not. Hopefully not. And then Doublelift, who used to get all the gold, and then Bjergsen, who used to get all the gold. So where's all of this going? They need to sort themselves out, more or less.
Yeah, and I think you have to bear in mind with some of this that when a player has higher or lower gold share, it's not always, it's not even mostly necessarily the team's decision on how to play. Yes, there is allotment of farm and who gets to catch these waves and who gets to catch those waves, but when you lose lane, that means you have less gold, which means your share of the team's total gold is lower. When you get a bunch of kills, you have more gold, which means your share is higher. So the phrase I always use is gold is both distributed and contributed. So you can make gold happen in the game by playing well. So part of the big reaction to Bjergsen and Doublelift, who's gonna when they have gold share percentages these high, where's it going to come from? Well, it's in theory, once they're actually clicking, it's going to come from racking up kills or whatever and make things work. And the other thing that to give TSM a little bit of credit for is in the regular season in the summer, it was all about Bjergsen getting everything, and everything was built around him, and Santorin camped his lane and everything. When they got into playoffs, which is where they looked much better, is when Bjergsen started to take a step back. He started playing Lulu. They got Dyrus onto Olaf. They did things with Wild Turtle, and who started to look much better in the playoffs. And it's because I think they recognize this setup doesn't work. And so that's the same thing they need to do in this, even more so in this new iteration of the team where they've got more individual talent. They need to have the setup where your Bjergsen can trust, I'm going to help these guys do better. Not that he has to play Lulu all the time or whatever, but just the philosophy of it. In some games, I'm going to make sure that Hauntzer is successful, and I'm going to support that with my own play and whatever else. And each of the players needs to be able to pick a role in a given composition and understand what it feels like to play that role. Because I think they are all individually talented enough to play different ways at different times. And once they kind of click into that, I think once their coaching especially kind of manages to help them get into that kind of mindset, then they're going to look much better, much stronger, and should be a really good team.
Alright, that's enough about TSM CLG for now. Let's move on to the other side of what we were talking about, CLG Dig. We talked about the CLG side and Dig things, about how Aphromoo was wording along, getting caught out, 6A looked a little lost as well. Dig. What do we think of Dig? I think Dig, I'll give mine first. Dig, I think, has incredibly good early game. In both games they played, they looked solid. They knew what to do in the early game. They got lost in the game against Energy, with the Baron steals and multiple Baron steals and multiple failed Barons, whatever. But in the game against CLG, they looked a lot more composed. I don't know if CLG, I can't really tell if Dig just shows a smarter time to Baron, or if CLG just looked lost at that time, but it looked better.
Well, let's give Dig a bit of credit, because those Baron steals were not like,
This is true.
well, there's Dignitas giving away a Baron. It's like, what? How did that get stolen? Like yes, they could have prevented it somehow with a better, better coordination and damage, but those were not quite miracle steals, but getting in that direction. So I think Dignitas deserves, and a little bit of credit should be taken away from Energy because they shouldn't have been able to steal those. But I do think Dignitas had some strengths. I think Kire is going to be a really good jungler for them. He's really talented, and he's kind of been flying under the radar because, what do you mean, import from European challenger? Like, how can he be any good? I think he will be really good. I think he showed some signs of it. I think Dig showed a really good plan against CLG of working around, shutting down Stixxay, bullying him, catching him, knowing that he's catchable, and taking advantage of it. I think they did some really smart things as a team. And I'm not the one most likely of the three of us to probably hype up Raz, but but I'll let you guys say how much it's Raz and he's a genius.
Well, I mean, I
let us
love
know.
Raz, but...
Yeah, I mean, it really did feel like Dignitas went into both of these games with a plan of how they were going to go forward and attack these teams. And unfortunately, it didn't work against NRG because they had those couple Barons that went the other way. And, it's very hard to come back from those kind of power spikes. But in their game against CLG, it really did feel like they knew what they wanted to be the entire time, and they executed it properly. Kiwi Kid played the Trundle really well. It's the kind of engagey kind of support that we've seen him do in the past. The pillars were on point. Even though Apollo isn't some sort of kill crazy AD carry, it just team fight after team fight. That really mattered, and it allowed Shifter to do some great Ahri plays, and other things I didn't think I'd be saying at the beginning of the year. Shifter forcing a sub 5-minute flash from his lane opponent. That's kind of new. It was nice to see that from him, and of course that says something about who he is, much as it says about Shifter. But all of these guys came together in a really strong way, and the only person I'm really worried about at the end of the day is going to be Smitty J. I'm still not 100% convinced that he is, it seems like he needs a lot of help in order to hold his own in that lane. And it's hard to tell, of course, because he had Chris in game one. Chris is the kind of guy you would expect him to do pretty well against. You have in game two, they put a lot of time and energy towards keeping Darshan down. And even then, Darshan was able to go pretty even 1v1 in lane, even while behind for a bit. And Smitty J doesn't have to be that kind of, amazing out-of-this-world top laner for this team to be successful. But I think it does say something about Dignitas that they understood how they needed to get that lane going, how they needed to deal with that split-pushing threat, and with the threats that NRG had in game one. And it did feel like the game plan, if nothing else, was very solid across the board. And that's something I love to see from a Dignitas team that has not always looked so organized, has not always looked so controlled in their decisions and in making the calls that they need to succeed. So I was pleasantly surprised on that angle at the very least. And I look forward to seeing what Raz does the more time he gets with this team.
You can kind of loop it all the way back around to talking about Fnatic at the start, because Gamsu is the link between Dignitas and Fnatic. And look what Gamsu did with Fnatic when he had a lead and the team was pressuring every lane. So Gamsu was able to split push really far forward. If they ran at him and caught him, which they did, his team punished, picked something else up in the other lane like we talked about before. When I wrote a full article about Gamsu a while back, by reviewing most of his games with Dignitas, at least from the summer split, that never happened. Whether Gamsu had a lead or not, and in some games he did, there was never a chance where he could push his lane up, split push far forward, go past the river, with vision or not, because if he did that, there was a free opportunity for the team to come up and kill him, because the rest of his team was never in a position of pressuring another point on the map, freeing him up to either offer the sacrifice or make the enemy make a bad decision or anything like that. Dignitas was never organized enough to have multiple pressure points on the map and enable Gamsu to be the split pusher. Part of that, I think, was communication among the team as a whole. Maybe Gamsu could have asserted himself a little bit more. It's not, Gamsu was great, but the rest of his team was terrible. It wasn't that at all. But we were able to see what Gamsu looked like in a team that had that pressure and had a plan. And so seeing Dignitas with more of a plan around how they want to play their game is a really big encouragement for what this team could be.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of like building on some of these points, like Chase was talking about the Shifter forcing a sub 5 minutes flash never being heard of. We've always known like the narrative Shifter, right? Like he was supposed to be on Good Game University, GGU, and then visa issues happened, put in visa limbo. Then Jintei filled in, whatever. Right? The next split comes in. And he's finally able to play, and then people are like, Shifter's something to be scared of. He's like really, really strong, roams really, really well, but like that never really happened. And whatever narratives you want to believe, Shifter losing faith in his team, becoming more reserved because he couldn't trust his team, whatever. And then I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to say this because it's not like a big secret or anything. But I in some conversations I had with Broken Shard when he was doing tryouts for Team Dig, and I was like, are you gonna replace Shifter? And he's like, he was like, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said that he thinks that the Beast is still sleeping, and he thinks he can bring it up. And I'm pretty sure that Raz agrees with us, so he's probably going to keep working with that. And if I know Raz to be the coach I think he's going to do it. At least for half the split. At least for half the split.
I mean, here's his opportunity, right? We'll see if Shifter can live up to that.
I hope, I hope, I have great hopes for the team.
It's one of the hardest splits ever to do it in, maybe, because North America, on paper at least, has maybe never looked stronger.
Yeah, on paper.
So,
that's true.
Yeah, on paper. It'll be tough.
Well, of course, everything we say about these teams based on 1 week of data should be taken with a grain of salt. For now, we're going to round out the show doing some knee-jerk reactions to Week 2 games, mainly because none of us have actually know who's playing who against Week 2, so I'm going to be reading off the list, literally, just say whatever comes to mind, alright?
Yeah.
Alright, let's do EU first. Let's see, Game 2. Week 2. First game, Giants or G2? G2.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say G2, but I don't think it's a given because I'm not that sold on G2 yet.
Alright, that's fair.
I'm higher on G2 than you are. I think this is going to be a pretty nice game for them. Perkz can beat XPepe, and after that, I don't know what. I'm not sure Adam is an LCS quality top laner. I'll put it that way.
All right. Then it's Elements versus Rockout. I'm saying Rockout for this one. I don't. Elements has always been that team for me where like I want to believe them, but I don't really want to.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Roccat as well. A, because I'm a fan and I want to believe, and B, because I just, when I look at how Roccat has been playing these last couple of games, they're going to try to put a lot of early pressure onto Ica. They're going to put a lot of early pressure in that jungle area, and those are things that I'm not sure Elements is capable of handling well at this point.
Yeah, I have to go with Roccat, somewhat cautiously, unless they pick Taric, in which case it's full in. Yep, they got it.
It was a fabulous pick, undoubtedly.
That's true. Alright, so... Alright, ooh, this is a big one. Origin versus Unicorns of Love.
Origin.
Yeah. They're gonna figure out what was plaguing them, I think.
Alright.
This is one of those. They're going to be angry that they went 0-2 last week. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to want to come out with something to prove, and we're overdue for a Soaz just hard carries them to Oblivion game.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm going to say. Origin will win if Soaz doesn't ult. That's my prediction. Splice versus Vitality.
It's Vitality.
Vitality.
I'm going to be disappointed by Shook, aren't I?
I mean, it's in play.
I don't have faith.
A lot of people are coming into the split. We're really high on Splice. Mm-hmm. I'm really not.
I'm not either.
And I think
my bad.
It's not just you. It's because I see too much enemy in them.
Okay.
Like enemy from NALCS last year. I think they have similar strengths and similar weaknesses.
Honestly, the way Splice played last week, I think they'd be glad to be enemy style at this point. This was rough. They just looked so lost. I don't know. They just didn't seem to have any understanding of what their composition did or why it should work or how to play it, and that's really hard to figure out if you're that far behind. I was very, very underwhelmed by last week.
Okay. For me, it's just because every time Shook... I feel like Shook is that player... I don't know if I'm coming down too harsh on him, but like I feel like every time he has to step up to shine, he doesn't. Otherwise, he is good, but like it's not consistent at all. So, Alright, 8 Fnatic versus H2K.
It's tougher than you'd think it should be.
This is much tougher.
I think H2K, but I think it's really close.
No.
And the reason I think it's really close is because Fnatic, because Daylord crafts these coherent plans, and the team already, with so little time, seemed to know how to follow through on that plan. I think they'll have a different plan this week than last week.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think H2K, I still think they haven't had that much time together. Fnatic hasn't. And H2K right now is the stronger team. I think it'll be really close between them and the whole top end of this league as time goes on. But 60-40 maybe in H2K's favor.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Daylor. I think he's a great coach. I also like Prawley quite a bit. I think Prawley is going to have these guys prepared just as well. And right now, I agree with you. I think H2K is the stronger team at this moment in time. So I'll go that way as well.
Yeah, you pretty much summed up my thoughts, so I don't have to say any more on that. Alright, that's day 1 games, day 2 games. Vitality versus Origin. Origin for me. But I'd say it's close, actually.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Vitality, actually. I think Cabochard right now is built for this kind of meta where he can play these hard-carrying, split-pushing top laners.
You gotta remember that Cabochard doesn't have Diamond constantly camping his lane.
Yeah, I mean, it's working out. It'll be interesting to see if he can continue to do it with Shook. Obviously, you need a good Shook game for it to work, but I think Cabochard, if you look at his laning stats, I mean, he's always found a way to thrive in this kind of meta. And I've already seen enough Soaz games where he's been a little bit off, and he just doesn't seem to, he and Amazing don't seem to be on the same page right now. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a chance that Vitality, it really comes together with something special for this one. So I'm gonna pick the upset there.
I'm going to go for Origin. But I think it's going to, just keep it quick, I think it's going to come down to the first one or maybe two ganks and who they work for.
I think that's actually worth it for. I don't think it's an upset though. I think it's actually. I think it hopefully will be closer than I think it is. Let's see. Elements versus Giants. I have no idea.
Elements.
All right.
I'll say Giants because Xpepe needs to win one at some point. His Vel'Koz game was really underappreciated last week because it was in a losing effort. And if he can hard carry that team against any mid laner, it'll be Ica. So
Sure,
I'll go there.
I'll agree with that. I'll go Giants for now. Like I said, Elements is the team like I want to believe in, but I shouldn't. In every iteration. All right, moving on. Fnatic versus Unicorns of Love.
Fnatic.
yeah, Fnatic. I want to go Unicorns of Love because I want to believe that what we saw last week is the Unicorns of Love we're going to see going forward. But there were a lot of things that broke their way that are just hard to imagine doing so again this week.
All right. Splice versus Rocket.
Rocket.
Reasons already elaborated upon.
Pretty much. All right. All right. These are the true knee-jerk reaction. Last one. G2 H2K. H2K for me.
H2K.
Yeah, sorry G2. I like you guys, but I don't like you H2K amount. So,
I think G2 has a chance to get trick fed and have things all kind of play out, but I think H2K is too organized to let that happen.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty high on this H2 roster. I like it a lot. All right, that's all of EU. All right, it's time for the knee-jerk reactions of NA. All right, I should have scrolled down sooner. Okay. Game 1, Tip C9 C9.
Don't ask me that question.
Yeah, Impulse is not an LCS team, so yeah, Cloud9.
Yeah,
they'll have more of their roster here, I think, unless they don't. But so,
yeah, I'll say C9 whether or not they play Bunny or High.
yeah.
Oh, this will be a good one. TSM Immortals.
Immortals. TSM needs more time.
Yeah, same. I really like what Immortals are putting together right now. I'm not ready to say that TSM's at that level yet.
Yeah, like I said earlier, TSM does not have a team identity right now. They need to figure themselves out. Plus, this will be a pretty fun time for Wild Turtle to destroy his old team. Alright, for this one, before we say anything, it's going to be Liquid versus CLG. But we just got word, also proving to Twitch chat, this is live, damn it. Not putting a shoe in my head. Dominate just announced his retirement. So they will be playing with Dardoch instead, right? Dardoch? Yeah,
yes.
Dardoch. So, without Dominate on Liquid, who is it? CLG or Liquid? I'll give it to CLG. I think Liquid throws a lot.
Yeah, I think it'll be CLG because CLG is a really well coached team. I think, like in terms of having a strategic plan and so on. Liquid, too many moving pieces in their roster right now to quite be there.
Yeah.
I think a little further down the road, Liquid could be, a playoff realm, kind of like lower end of the playoffs kind of a team. But right now, they need to figure some stuff out.
Yeah, CLG's a much safer bet right now. And honestly, as much as I like what Dardoch did in Game 1, it still feels like they are really struggling to know when to follow in on certain plays, where to be at the right time. And Piglet's playing great, but you can't say that about anyone else on that roster right now, at least on a consistency point.
For me, Liquid has always been that team where they look really good when they do, and then the other times they look really good, and then they just completely combust. Either someone gets caught out, or they just tower dive really badly. I don't know. Like, Liquid's always that team that they are exactly their namesake. They are too liquid to bet on consistently.
Breaking my heart.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. All right, Dig versus Renegades. I'm gonna go Dig. I'm sticking with my boy Raz.
Yeah. At this point, I go Dignitas. I think Renegades can get there, but they did not look confident enough. And I don't trust Legendary's pool in this meta right now. It really feels like he is holding them back to a certain extent. until they figure out how else to play with him.
This will actually be a pretty interesting game because we've kind of said it before. Like Renegade's done pretty good stuff early game, relatively, and then Dig is also consistent in the early game, at least in 1 week's sample of the game. So it would be pretty interesting if two solid early game teams go against each other.
Yeah, I think this is, for Renegades, this is a team that they have a pretty good chance to beat. I'm actually going to go with Renegades in this one.
Okay.
I think the top lane matchup is less of a threat against Dignitas than it was against some of the other teams that Renegades have played. I think their kind of team structure and team identity is going to have a chance to come through here, and they've got more talent in their AD carry, and I think one of the conditions for me is going to be how much more comfortable Remy looks on stage, and somewhat RF Legendary as well, and if they're able to kind of make some of their mechanical misplays go away, especially for Remy who had some issues and didn't play all that well. If those can go away, I think this will be a good chance for Renegades to get themselves out there.
All right. Let's see, day 2 NA games. We'll lead with TSM Dig. That's actually a pretty tough one.
I think TSM's just going to straight outskill that one personally.
Yeah, that's unfortunately what I think, because I think Dig will still be stronger than TSM in the early game, but I'm not as confident in their end game. So yeah, like you said, I think they're going to outskill even if they lose early game.
They're going to need to push really well to close out. If they do get a lead, if Dignitas does get a lead, they have to be able to close out efficiently. So, for example, Team Liquid was not able to close out efficiently at all, so TSM was able to just mechanically find the plays that got them back in. And so Dignitas has to show a better ability to close, assuming that they can actually get an early game lead, which isn't a given.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to take TSM here. This is when, at some point, talent can just put these kinds of things together, and they've found a way, even when they don't play the early game well, to at least keep the game going long enough to give themselves a chance. And there's always that chance for the Dignitas Baron throw, so I feel better on that sense. I'm just saying.
Losing macro play, winning talent alone. God, I'm really gonna hate myself drawing all these parallels for no reason. I also forgot a day 1 game. It's Energy versus Echo Fox. Energy.
Energy.
I'm not sure we need to elaborate on that one. So at least that's the game I skipped. Alright. Speaking of Energy, the second game of day 2 will actually be Energy versus Immortals.
Immortals. I think they've got a really good plan of how to, Huni and Reignover just as a combo. Forget the other 3. In the early game, they can synergize so well together and make some plays together to get a lead. And given that I've kind of shown Energy's weak point, or claimed Energy's weak point to be their laning phase, I think Immortals is a great team at getting that laning phase lead and shoving it home. So I think Immortals has the style to win this game.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The thing about Energy's laning phase issues is that it's not the top lane. Like Uni and Reignover, that 2v2 with Impact and Moon, I think, has a chance to go very even. I'm not sure I would call Pobelcher a lane bully per se in that position. Wild Turtle is, I think, where you could really hurt Energy on the laning phase, but I'm actually going to go with Energy on the upset. I think that we didn't really get too much time to see that team at full strength. I loved what we saw from Impact. I love the kind of synergy that we saw come together. They're certainly a flawed team, but this is they have the potential to really come together, especially if GBM is able to do any amount of, once he hits that mid-game power spike, if he can take advantage of that the way he did this week, I think there's a chance that NRG could really surprise some people here. And I think that'd be fun to see.
For me, I'm going to go Energy, because it's going to be a close game no matter what. Like, either it's really close, or one team just makes the break point really early and just snowballs it. I'm going to go with Energy in this one, though, maybe because I'm biased for Hermit. But Hermit is familiar, very familiar, with Reignover and Huni, given that he worked with Origin a lot, and they went against, Fnatic head-to-head, right?
Yeah, I think either Immortals, either Reignover destroys Moon, and Immortals snowballs this game by like the 30-minute mark at the latest, or Immortals doesn't build a big enough snowball, Energy find some team fights around the 20 to 30 minute mark. Things stay really close, and Energy wins on like a giant team fight at the end, something like that. Those are the two paths that I think this game could go.
Yeah, I think this is actually my most interesting game of the week for NA.
Yeah. Sounds a lot like the patterns that Fnatic versus Origin used to follow.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that'll be pretty interesting to analyze as well. All right, moving on. CLG versus C9.
Who's playing support?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Let's assume high.
Yeah. I think I want to say CLG actually, but it depends on. That's me giving Zix a lot of credit as CLG's coach to understand how to beat C9 and maybe specifically how to beat Rush. There's no guarantee that'll work. Rush can surprise, and High can do some strategic things to surprise, but I'm going to give CLG an edge.
Yeah, I'm going to give CLG the slight edge as well. I think that this is a meta that's very favorable to the way that CLG likes to play. I think obviously there's a concern in the mid lane if Jensen is able to just straight up outplay Huhi, that could get rough pretty quickly. But in every other aspect of the game, I feel like CLG does have that understanding of how to attack Cloud9, of how to use the kind of champions that are naturally in their players' pools to their advantage here. And I think that if Zix is the coach we believe he is, and CLG is the team that they claim to be, this is the kind of game you need to win. This is the moment to kind of prove that, and I believe they're going to.
Okay. I'll go CLG too, if only because I think Rush is like really predictable. And if I don't know, C9 is going to be a weird team for me to split, just because I believe in them and also don't. I use that phrase a little too much. I don't know how Rush is going to do on the team long term, so that's what I'll go with for now. All right, Echo Fox versus Liquid.
Liquid. I think by that game, by Sunday this week, Liquid's going to have just that much small amount more experience and idea of maybe just even who their 5 players are going to be. And I think they had chances to win both of their games this past weekend, even though they, especially in the first game, they really played poorly, but they still had a chance, mostly because of Piglet, who, we didn't really, I don't think we even mentioned his name at all this entire show, but man, Piglet is good.
Yeah, he's really good.
It's too bad that he, wasn't really getting the playmakers around him to help him out that much, but I think Team Liquid is better than they've looked. I think they're going to be much better than they've looked, and I think this is a game where they've got a really good chance to show it.
Yeah, I'm Liquid as well. I think Dardoch showed a lot more this in that game too than Hard showed in either of his 2 games. I'm not sold on KFO. I think Piglet, as amazing as he's looked, should be able to dominate that bot lane. It's just one of those matchups for Liquid that, assuming that Phoenix can at least keep it close in the mid lane, it should be very, very hard for Echo Fox to find that in. And right now, it's the kind of thing where Liquid will have had a day on the first day of the week to kind of figure out any bumps that are left. So hopefully they'll be able to take care of business here.
Okay. I'm actually gonna go Echo Fox. Like I said before, I don't know how consistent Liquid's gonna be because they always look good until they don't. It's like they're the new Coast or something. I'm sorry if that stings, Chase.
Winning the game until they lost.
I'm a Team Dynamic GGU fan. After Coast bought in, that's when we somehow decided as a management to let our mid laner and jungler not talk to each other for multiple months at a time, and that was apparently fine. So, as far as I'm concerned, there was an era in which I no longer I can forget that exists. It's fine.
It's the black history.
It's the darkest timeline. Yeah.
All right, but yeah, I'm gonna go with Echo Fox for now. I know that might be a long shot, but like I said, Liquid is not consistent for me right now, and whatever. All right. Last game is Tip Renegades. I'm going Renegades.
Renegades.
Don't ask me that question.
Sorry, Tip. I think that was pretty much the easiest one we can do for our last game and first game. Alright, that's pretty much all of our knee-jerk reactions, remember? They're knee-jerk reactions, so don't go flaming us on Twitter for wrong.
Predictions are a fool's game.
That is true.
So.
Especially with limited data and like 2 sentences worth of predictions. All right.
Of course.
Let's go. All right, shoutouts. Tim, shoutouts.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter's on the screen there. Just glad to be on, and anytime anybody kind of checks out any of my content, it's really cool to see. You can find a lot of my work on oracleselixir.com. Find my articles on unicorn.com/community. And I'd love to hear some feedback from you guys, and always interesting to hear what people think, or to see how people are using the stats that I'm putting out there. That's maybe the most fun. So,
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's always nice to be back on Into the Rift. If you want to follow me, you can find me at RedShirtKing on Twitter. I tend to live tweet, especially during the European games, because I tend to focus mostly on Europe and Turkey nowadays. ImperialEsports.gg. If you want to keep up with our site, it's not quite launched yet, but that'll be where all my written content will be pretty soon. And all of the podcasts I do. It is the Rough Drafts podcast. If you go to soundcloud.com/esportsroughdrafts, you can get things like our week-by-week previews, where we take 3 teams from each region and kind of look at what happened the last week and look at in-depth what we think is going to happen next week, as well as some gambling line fun stuff. We had an interview with Devin Pyrotechnics Young from the EULCS recently. We had Soldier on, the former coach of Gravity and Gamers 2, to talk about his views on those kinds of issues. So tons of great content depending on what you're looking for. Totally check that out. Like I said, soundcloud.com/esportsroughdrafts, or just search Rough Drafts on iTunes, and you'll find us from there.
All right. And for me, shout out to Esports Heaven. That's where I write. Not wrote. Jeez, let's move on from that slip. I actually just put out something today. It's a recap of the LGL games. I'm going to be covering them from now on. And I'm not going to preview what I'm writing next because I have no idea when I'm going to finish it. It's probably the longest piece I've ever written. But keep an eye out for that. I hope it's going to be really good. Hoping people are going to like it. Also, shoutouts to pretty much all the panels we have on the show. We've had a lot of great panels on the show. We've lost a lot of great panels on the show. Rest in peace, Ross. Gonna miss having him on the show. But yeah, seriously. Thanks for everyone for watching. Thanks for putting up with my inconsistent schedule for this show, given how sick I get during winter. Alright, that'll be all for now. I'm signing off. Good night.